My daughter called me a limping embarrassment and banned me from her son's engagement dinner. What she didn't realize was that her late husband had structured his will to ensure she couldn't touch a penny without my signature, and her attitude just cost her $1.8 million. The call came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon in Milwaukee while I was sitting in my favorite armchair reading a book and enjoying the peaceful sound of raindrops against my window. I was expecting it to be my daughter Catherine calling with final details about my grandson Michael's engagement dinner that weekend, the celebration I'd been looking forward to for months. Instead, Catherine's voice carried that particular tone she used when she'd made a decision she knew I wouldn't like but was determined to push through anyway. "Mom, I've been thinking about the engagement party," she began, and I could already hear the careful calculation in her voice. "And I think it might be better if you sat this one out." I set down my book, confused. Sat it out? Catherine, it's Michael's engagement dinner. Why would I miss my own grandson's celebration? "It's not that we don't want you there," she said quickly, though her tone suggested exactly the opposite. "It's just that this is going to be a very special evening. Elegant, sophisticated. Michael's fiancée, Ashley, comes from a very prominent family, and her parents are flying in from New York specifically for this dinner." "And?" I asked, though I was beginning to understand where this conversation was headed. Catherine took a deep breath, clearly steeling herself for what came next. "Mom, you've been using that walker for 6 months now, and honestly, it's become noticeable. The way you move, the sounds it makes on the floor, the way you need help getting in and out of chairs. It's just not the image we want to project for such an important family milestone." The words hit me like a physical blow. My walker, the mobility aid I'd needed since my hip surgery the previous winter, was apparently too embarrassing for my own family to tolerate at a celebration in my honor as the family matriarch. "Catherine, are you telling me I'm not invited to Michael's engagement dinner because I use a walker?" "I'm telling you that we want this evening to be perfect," she replied, her voice growing more defensive. "Ashley's family is used to a certain standard. Her father is a prominent businessman, her mother sits on charity boards, and they're expecting to meet a family that reflects their values and social standing. And a grandmother who needs mobility assistance doesn't reflect those values? Mom, don't make this harder than it has to be. You'll have plenty of other opportunities to celebrate with Michael and Ashley. Maybe we can plan a quiet dinner at home next month, something more suitable for your current needs." What happened next was even worse than the phone call. Catherine apparently decided that her unilateral decision needed family backup, so she called a family meeting at her house the following day, a meeting I wasn't invited to, but which I learned about when my grandson Michael called me afterward, clearly uncomfortable with what had transpired. "Grandma," Michael said, his voice strained, "I need to talk to you about what Mom said." "About the engagement dinner?" I asked. "Yeah, about you not coming." He paused, and I could hear the conflict in his voice. "She called everyone together, me, Ashley, Uncle David, Aunt Susan, and basically presented it like it was already decided." "What exactly did she say?" Michael was quiet for a moment, clearly struggling with whether to repeat his mother's words. "She said that having you there would turn the celebration into a pity party, that Ashley's family would spend the whole evening feeling sorry for you instead of focusing on our engagement. She said it wouldn't be fair to Ashley to have her special moment overshadowed by your limitations." The phrase pity party felt like a knife twisting in my chest. This was how my own daughter saw me, not as the woman who had raised her, not as the grandmother who had helped shape Michael into the man he'd become, but as an object of pity whose presence would somehow diminish other people's joy. "And what did you say to that?" I asked. "I tried to argue, Grandma. I really did. I said it was your family too, and that it didn't feel right celebrating without you. But Mom had all these reasons ready, and Ashley's parents were there on speakerphone from New York, and everyone kept talking about maintaining the tone of the evening and ensuring everyone's comfort." Ashley's parents were involved in this decision? Ashley's dad made some comment about how family events can be challenging when older relatives have special needs, and how they appreciated our family's sensitivity to the situation. Mom took that as validation that she was making the right choice. I closed my eyes, imagining my daughter presenting my mobility needs as a problem to be managed, rather than a simple fact of life that any loving family would accommodate without question. "Michael," I said carefully, "how do you feel about this?" There was a long pause. "Honestly, Grandma, I hate it. But Mom's paying for the dinner, and she's handling all the arrangements, and Ashley's family is already coming from out of town. She made it sound like changing anything now would be disrespectful to our guests and unfair to Ashley." But Catherine wasn't content to simply exclude me quietly. Over the next few days, I learned from various family members and friends that she'd been actively explaining my absence in advance, crafting a narrative that painted her as a thoughtful daughter protecting everyone's comfort. My neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, mentioned that she'd run into Catherine at the grocery store. "She told me you wouldn't be at Michael's engagement dinner because you weren't feeling up to it," Mrs. Rodriguez said. "But she made sure to mention how difficult it's been for the family to watch you struggle with mobility issues." My sister called from Arizona after receiving what was apparently a detailed email from Catherine explaining why I wouldn't be at the celebration. "She went into great detail about your walker, Margaret," my sister said, "about how you shuffle when you walk now, and how you need help with stairs, and how it's become heartbreaking for the family to watch your decline." The most hurtful report came from my longtime friend Eleanor, who had been planning to attend the dinner as my guest. Catherine had called her directly to rescind the invitation. "She told me that the dinner was being restructured to be more intimate," Eleanor said. But then she went on to explain that they'd realized it wouldn't be appropriate to have guests who might need special accommodations. She specifically mentioned that she wouldn't be able to navigate the restaurant steps easily, and that having to make arrangements for that would be disruptive to the evening's flow. I realized that Catherine hadn't just excluded me from one family dinner. She'd created a public narrative about my supposed incapacity that would follow me through every future family interaction. In her mind, she was protecting the family's image, but what she was actually doing was systematically isolating me from my own loved ones. The final straw came when I learned about Catherine's conversation with Ashley's mother, Patricia Whitmore, who apparently sat on several prominent charity boards in New York. Catherine had called her to prepare her for meeting our family and had used the opportunity to further explain my absence. Michael reluctantly shared the details after I pressed him about why Ashley had seemed so uncomfortable during their last visit to my house. "Ashley said her mom mentioned that you were struggling with the challenges of aging and that our family was handling it with grace by making practical decisions about social situations," Michael said. Patricia apparently praised Mom for being realistic about what was appropriate for someone in your condition. What made this even more insulting was that Patricia Whitmore, according to her charity work, was supposedly an advocate for senior citizens' rights and accessibility issues. Yet she had apparently endorsed Catherine's decision to exclude me from family events based on my mobility needs. "Catherine also told Patricia about your financial concerns," Michael added reluctantly. "She mentioned that you'd been worried about expenses lately and that the family had been discreetly helping you with costs. Patricia apparently found it admirable that our family was handling your situation with such dignity." This was completely fabricated. I had never expressed financial concerns to Catherine, nor had I needed or asked for financial assistance from anyone. But Catherine had apparently decided that portraying me as both physically impaired and financially vulnerable made her decision to exclude me seem more justified. A loving daughter protecting her struggling mother from social situations that might be too much for me to handle. What Catherine didn't know, what she'd never bothered to learn, was the true nature of her late husband Robert's estate planning. Robert had been a successful insurance broker, and he'd been extremely thoughtful about how to structure his assets to protect both his immediate family and ensure that his mother-in-law, me, would never be vulnerable to financial manipulation or family pressure. Robert had died 18 months earlier after a brief illness, leaving behind a substantial estate worth approximately $1.8 million. Catherine knew about the existence of the estate. She'd been receiving monthly distributions that allowed her to maintain her comfortable lifestyle, pay for Michael's college expenses, and fund elaborate family celebrations like this engagement dinner. What Catherine didn't understand was the structure Robert had put in place to ensure that these distributions would continue only as long as his family treated me with the respect and dignity he felt I deserved. Robert had been witness to too many situations where elderly family members were mistreated, ignored, or manipulated by relatives who stood to inherit from them. He'd seen friends' mothers pushed into unwanted living situations, excluded from family decisions, or gradually isolated from the people they loved most. He was determined that this would never happen to me. The trust Robert had established required my written approval for any distributions over $5,000 per month. The monthly stipend Catherine had been receiving was exactly $4,999, small enough to continue automatically, but insufficient to maintain the lifestyle she'd grown accustomed to during Robert's lifetime. Any major expenses, home improvements, luxury purchases, elaborate celebrations, or significant gifts to family members required additional distributions from the trust, and those distributions required my signature on a request form that included a detailed explanation of what the money would be used for. Robert had also built in what he jokingly called a respect clause when he'd explained the trust structure to me shortly before his death. If I ever felt that Catherine or other family members were treating me poorly, disrespectfully, or were attempting to exclude me from family activities, I had the right to suspend all distributions from the trust indefinitely. Margaret, Robert had said during one of our last conversations, I've seen too many families where money becomes a weapon used to control or dismiss the older generation. I never want you to feel like you have to tolerate poor treatment because you're dependent on family generosity. This trust ensures that treating you well isn't just the right thing to do, it's financially essential. The trust documents, which Catherine had never asked to see in detail, explicitly stated that the purpose of the inheritance was to ensure the continued well-being and inclusion of Margaret Patterson in family activities and decisions, and to provide her with the financial security and family respect she has earned through a lifetime of love and service. Robert had been particularly specific about social inclusion. One clause stated that if I were ever excluded from family celebrations, holiday gatherings, or milestone events due to age, health, or mobility issues, I could consider this grounds for suspending trust distributions until the family demonstrated a renewed commitment to treating me as a valued and included family member. At the time Robert explained this to me, I thought it was unnecessary. Surely Catherine would never treat me as anything less than a cherished family member. But Robert had been more prescient than either of us realized. The Saturday evening of Michael's engagement dinner, I sat in my living room thinking about my grandson celebrating this milestone without his grandmother present, and I made a decision that had been building for weeks. I called my attorney, James Harrison, who had helped Robert structure the trust and who had been sending me quarterly reports on the estate's performance and distribution history. James, I said, I need to invoke the respect clause in Robert's trust. There was a pause. Margaret, are you sure? That's a significant step. Can you walk me through what's happened? I spent 40 minutes detailing the events of the past month: Catherine's phone call, the family meeting, the public explanations of my absence, the conversation with Ashley's mother, and the systematic campaign to portray me as incapacitated and financially dependent. And they excluded you from the engagement celebration based on your use of a walker? James asked, his professional composure giving way to obvious disapproval. Not just excluded me, I clarified. Catherine has been telling people that I'm declining mentally and physically, that I'm financially struggling, and that the family is graciously managing my situation by making decisions about what social events are appropriate for me. Margaret, Robert specifically anticipated this kind of behavior when he structured the trust. He was very clear that he never wanted you to feel like you had to accept disrespectful treatment from family members who were financially dependent on the estate he'd left behind. James explained that invoking the respect clause would immediately suspend all trust distributions above the basic $4,999 monthly stipend until Catherine and I could meet with a family mediator and work out a written agreement about how I would be included in future family activities. The trust has been distributing an additional $8,000 to $12,000 per month to Catherine for discretionary expenses, James explained. Without those distributions, she'll need to significantly adjust her lifestyle and spending habits. And the engagement dinner? I asked. Based on the expense reports I've been receiving, Catherine requested and received a $15,000 distribution last month specifically for engagement-related celebrations. If you invoke the respect clause, she'll need to return any unused portions of that distribution, and future celebration-related expenses won't be approved until the family relationship issues are resolved. Monday morning, I called Catherine and asked her to come over for an important conversation about Robert's estate. I didn't explain why, just that we needed to discuss some financial matters that required her immediate attention. She arrived within an hour, probably expecting to discuss some routine paperwork or perhaps to request additional funds for wedding-related expenses now that the engagement celebration had gone so successfully. "Mom, I'm so glad you called," she said, settling into my living room with the satisfied air of someone who felt vindicated by recent events. The engagement dinner was absolutely perfect. Ashley's parents were so impressed with our family, and the whole evening had exactly the tone we were hoping for. You would have been proud of how well everything went. "I'm sure it was lovely," I said quietly. "Catherine, we need to talk about your father's trust." "Of course," she said, pulling out her phone, probably ready to calculate whatever expenses she wanted to request reimbursement for. "What do you need?" I handed her the trust documents that James had helped me prepare, along with a formal notice of distribution suspension that would take effect immediately. "I'm invoking what Robert called the respect clause in his will," I said calmly. "As of today, all discretionary distributions from the trust are suspended indefinitely." Catherine looked at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. "I don't understand. What does this mean?" "It means that your monthly income from Robert's estate just dropped from approximately $12,000 to $4,999, I explained. "It means that the $15,000 you received last month for engagement expenses needs to be returned to the trust if you haven't spent all of it. And it means that future requests for wedding expenses, home improvements, or other discretionary spending won't be approved until we resolve some issues about how I'm being treated by this family." The color drained from Catherine's face as she began to understand the financial implications. "Mom, you can't be serious. This is Robert's money. He left it for our family." "He left it for our family on the condition that I be treated as a valued and included family member," I corrected. "When you decided I was too much of a limping embarrassment to attend Michael's engagement dinner, you violated the terms under which this trust operates." Catherine was reading through the trust documents now, her expression shifting from confusion to alarm to something approaching panic as she began to understand how much of her current lifestyle depended on distributions that I controlled. "But Mom, that was just one dinner," she said desperately. And we were thinking of your comfort, not trying to hurt you. Were you thinking of my comfort when you told Ashley's mother that I was financially struggling and that the family was helping me? I asked. Were you considering my well-being when you created a public narrative about my supposed mental and physical decline? I never said you were declining mentally, Catherine protested, though her voice lacked conviction. You told multiple people that I was struggling and that the family was making practical decisions about what was appropriate for someone in my condition. You portrayed me as incapacitated and dependent, and you used those false characterizations to justify excluding me from family celebrations. I pulled out the folder of documentation I'd been collecting, notes from conversations with Mrs. Rodriguez, my sister, Eleanor, and Michael, along with emails Catherine had sent to extended family members explaining my absence from various events. This isn't about one dinner, Catherine. This is about a pattern of behavior where you've been systematically isolating me from family activities and then justifying that isolation by spreading false information about my capabilities and financial situation. The silence that followed was unlike anything I'd ever experienced with my daughter. She was clearly calculating the financial implications of the suspended trust distributions, trying to figure out how she would maintain her lifestyle, pay for Michael's upcoming wedding expenses, and manage the commitments she'd made based on income that was no longer guaranteed. "What do I need to do?" she asked finally, her voice small and defeated. "You need to understand that respect isn't optional in this family," I said. "You need to acknowledge that excluding me from family celebrations because of my mobility needs was wrong. And you need to commit to treating me as a valued family member whose presence enhances rather than diminishes family gatherings." Over the following weeks, Catherine and I worked with James and a family mediator to establish clear guidelines for how family celebrations and decisions would include me going forward. Catherine had to publicly correct the false narrative she'd spread about my mental and physical capabilities, and she had to personally apologize to Ashley's family for misrepresenting my situation. The most important outcome was Michael's reaction. When he learned what had happened, he immediately planned a proper engagement celebration, one that centered around introducing his grandmother to his future bride as an honored family matriarch rather than a burden to be managed. My daughter had called me a limping embarrassment and banned me from her son's engagement dinner. What she discovered was that her late husband had structured his will to ensure she couldn't touch a penny without my signature, and her cruel attitude had cost her access to $1.8 million. Sometimes the most powerful lesson about respect comes with a price tag attached.